Nancy Price was the overlooked analyst in a sea of louder voices, buried beneath deadlines and thankless work. Elijah Cross was the brilliant young CEO with power in his pocket and pressure at his heels. They weren't supposed to meet, not like this. And they certainly weren't supposed to see each other. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Nancy lay awake that night, her ceiling dimly illuminated by soft streetlight. She wasn't thinking about reports or charts or deadlines. She was thinking about him. About the way Elijah's eyes had held hers after she finished speaking. About the warmth in his voice when he said, "Then let's figure it out together." It hadn't been a line. Not corporate polish. Not charm. It had been real. And she couldn't stop replaying it. The next day, Nancy returned to the 16th floor. It was no longer unfamiliar, no longer intimidating. It felt like stepping into a version of her future that had always existed, but had finally opened its door. Elijah was already waiting in the collaborative strategy lounge, sleeves rolled again, that same notebook in his lap. As she entered, he stood, not out of obligation, but out of respect. That tiny gesture set the tone. They sat down across from each other, but the air between them didn't feel like a boundary anymore. It felt like a bridge. He began without pleasantries. "I want to restructure the way we collect internal data, actual feedback, not surveys that people are scared to answer honestly. Something continuous. Private. Transparent. Employee-driven." She nodded, like an emotional analytics dashboard. Less about efficiency, more about engagement. His eyebrows rose. Exactly. They worked for 3 hours straight, whiteboards, spreadsheets, sketching UX flows for internal tools. Somewhere between redesigning the onboarding journey and dismantling hierarchy charts, they ended up side by side at the same whiteboard, arms brushing. It was electric. Not overt. Not inappropriate. Just charged. Nancy reached for a marker just as Elijah did, and their hands touched. She froze. So did he. It lasted a second. Maybe two. But it echoed like a chord played in a silent room. He didn't apologize. Neither did she. Instead, he said quietly, "This is good. Us. Working like this." She nodded, not trusting her voice. They returned to work, but something had shifted. The space between them pulsed. Not with fear. Not with confusion. With possibility. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into rhythm. Mornings began with quiet coffees before meetings. Evenings ended with impromptu strategy sessions that somehow drifted into philosophy and childhood stories. He learned that Nancy's mother was once a librarian, and that Nancy had practically grown up between the pages of books. She learned that Elijah used to draw when he couldn't sleep. Blueprints, spaceships, cities he imagined himself building. They teased. They challenged. They laughed. One Thursday night, after everyone had left the building, Nancy found Elijah on the 16th floor balcony, leaning over the railing with a pen tucked behind his ear, staring out at the city. "Long day?" she asked. "Long week," he replied, offering her the extra coffee he always seemed to have for her now. "But it's better when you're here." Nancy took the cup, her fingers brushing his. His gaze didn't leave hers. "Elijah," she began, but he cut her off gently. I know this is complicated. I know what people will say. I know the stakes." He stepped closer, not enough to cross the line, but enough to let her feel his warmth. "But when I look at you, I don't see a risk. I see what this company has needed all along. I see the woman who makes me want to lead better. Be better." She swallowed hard. Then, softly, "I've spent so long being invisible. I don't know how to be looked at like that." His eyes softened. "Then let me be the one who learns how to do it right." They didn't kiss that night. They didn't need to, because they had chosen each other, not with fireworks or declarations, but with proximity, trust, and the shared act of building something that mattered. Together. By Monday morning, Nancy's title had changed. Director of Strategic Development and Culture Reform. An internal memo from Elijah had gone out to all department heads, praising her data-driven initiatives, her insight, and her commitment to people-first strategy. There were no mentions of dinners. No whispers of favoritism. Just facts. Facts no one could dispute. At 9:01 a.m., Nancy stepped off the elevator onto her new floor. The same floor where, just weeks ago, no one knew her name. Now they stood when she entered. She nodded back, calm, poised, unstoppable. And in her heart, she carried two truths. She had earned everything, and she was no longer walking alone. Nancy had never cared for attention. Praise made her skin itch. Spotlights had always felt too warm, too invasive. But power, real power, not the loud kind, but the kind earned by merit, strategy, and unwavering presence, felt different. It was quiet. It wasn't handed to her in a dramatic boardroom scene. It arrived slowly, in the deference in people's tone when they asked her opinion, in how department heads began inviting her to discussions rather than looping her in after decisions were made, in the way her inbox changed from chaos to consultation. She wasn't asking for space anymore. She was the space, and they all knew it, even Madison, especially Madison. Nancy didn't gloat. She didn't make speeches. She didn't micromanage or play political games. But the day Madison forwarded a report and added, "Please advise, Director Price," Nancy stared at her screen a full minute before typing back two clinical, devastating sentences that required Madison to revise her entire department's staffing allocations. It wasn't revenge. It was alignment. Everyone had to adjust now, including the people who used to pretend she didn't exist. But outside of work, things were no less intense. Nancy and Elijah had grown closer in the same way gravity takes over when two stars pass too near. It was inevitable. Slow. Powerful. They had rules. Boundaries. They never flirted at work. No lingering touches in meetings. No casual lunches alone. But when the elevator doors closed behind them at night, and the city lights glowed like embers, they dropped their armor. There was a night in April when everything threatened to unravel. A senior executive had leaked an internal email suggesting that Nancy's promotion was the result of CEO proximity rather than professional achievement. The email hit the company like a spark in dry grass. Nancy heard the news from HR. She stood in front of her office window, the sun setting gold over the sound, arms folded across her chest, jaw clenched. The email didn't mention her by name, but everyone knew. Elijah found her minutes later. "I'll handle it," he said. "Legal's already reviewing it. I'll make a statement." "No," she interrupted. He blinked. "What? You won't make a statement." "I will." He hesitated. "Nancy, I didn't come this far to have a man defend my legitimacy, even you. If I stay quiet now, they win." She walked into the all-hands meeting the next morning with nothing in her hands. No notes, no laptop, no slideshow. Just clarity. Elijah sat in the back. She stepped to the front, cleared her throat, and said, "Let's talk about truth." For 10 minutes, she addressed the entire company. She didn't name names. She didn't shout. She just told them how many years she spent being invisible. How she'd worked behind the scenes on systems people now use daily. How she hadn't been chosen because of proximity, but because of proof. Then she smiled. "I don't need validation. I have data." And she clicked a remote. Behind her, a screen lit up with growth metrics, retention, engagement, productivity, all directly tied to the cultural reforms she had led. Silence. Then applause. Not polite. Not obligatory. Earned. Later that night, Elijah found her on the rooftop. He didn't speak. Just wrapped his arms around her from behind, forehead against the back of her neck. She leaned into him and whispered, "You proud of me?" "God, Nancy," he murmured. "I'm in awe of you." She turned in his arms, finally looking up at him. Not as his director, or his employee, or even his partner in strategy, but as the woman who now shared his future. "I'm scared sometimes," she admitted. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Good. It means you're still growing." Then he kissed her. And this time it wasn't careful. It wasn't measured. It was everything they'd been building toward, without apology, without fear, and without holding back. The city stretched behind them. And above, the stars blinked in silent celebration. The following months unfolded like a symphony, measured, intentional, and quietly magnificent. Nancy adjusted to her role as Director of Strategic Development and Culture Reform with the precision of someone who'd been quietly training for it her whole life. She didn't seek control, she created structure. Not power plays, but systems that elevated others. Systems that worked. She wasn't just transforming the workplace. She was transforming people. New mentorship programs were launched. One-on-one leadership coaching for mid-tier managers. A confidential reporting system for staff with concerns. For the first time, people didn't just survive in silence. They spoke. They were heard. And across the company, from junior interns to seasoned engineers, the name Nancy Price no longer elicited confusion or dismissal. It commanded respect. But while Nancy's professional world expanded, her personal one quietly deepened. She and Elijah had settled into an intimate, private rhythm. Their relationship wasn't a headline. It wasn't a secret either. It just didn't need to be anyone else's business. They worked side by side in meetings without any change in decorum. They disagreed, challenged one another, tested each other's ideas like fire-hardening steel. And at night they softened. In the quiet of shared spaces, over warm meals and whispered laughter, they became more than a couple. They became partners in the truest sense of the word. Nancy had moved into Elijah's apartment, a minimalist, warm space with an entire wall dedicated to books and another to windows. She brought with her life, plants, throw blankets, a tea cabinet. Her telescope now sat near the balcony door, pointed at the stars. He called it the third member of our relationship. One Saturday morning, while she brewed jasmine tea in the kitchen, Elijah walked in barefoot, wearing a worn gray t-shirt and reading over a manila folder. "You're working?" she asked, teasing. He lifted the folder, eyes half-lidded with sleep. "Not work. A possibility." He handed it to her. Inside, a proposal for an independent foundation. Mission: empowerment in corporate culture. Mentorship: ethical leadership training. Scholarships for women in business, especially from underrepresented communities. She blinked at the document, stunned. "You wrote this?" "Drafted it last night," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about what we started here. About what it could look like, out there." He paused. "I want to build it with you. I don't want this to just be about us fixing one company. I want it to ripple." Nancy swallowed hard. "Are you sure?" He stepped closer. His voice dropped. "I was never more sure of anything than I am of you." They called it the Constellation Initiative, named after the project they had co-created that began the company's culture reform. The logo was a stylized star cluster with a single thread connecting the dots, like the lines in a natal chart. Each point a person who might have been overlooked, now linked in light. It began as a foundation. Within 2 months, it became a movement. Partnerships formed with universities. Retreats were scheduled for burned-out leaders to relearn human-centric management. Anonymous storytelling panels were hosted in different cities, giving voices to people who had been silenced by systems. Nancy stood at the helm of it all, not as a symbol, but as a guide. People came not just to listen, but to follow her. And always Elijah was beside her, not in front of her, never behind. Beside. One evening, they sat together on their balcony, watching the sun fade into the horizon. The city buzzed below, but here it was still. Nancy leaned into Elijah, her head resting against his shoulder. "I think we're doing something real," she said softly. He took her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "I think we're doing something forever." She looked at him then, this man who had once been an untouchable CEO, now the partner she brainstormed with at 2 a.m., danced barefoot within the kitchen, and planned a future with that reached far beyond the walls of any office. "I love you," she said, not needing ceremony. He smiled like he'd been waiting forever to hear it. I've loved you since the first time you looked me in the eye and didn't flinch. She laughed, eyes damp. Let's keep building. Elijah leaned forward and kissed her forehead, then her lips. We already are. And above them, as if to confirm it, the stars blinked quietly into place. Each one a promise, each one a point on a map they now wrote together. The gala was held at the edge of the waterfront, a glass and steel venue shaped like a sail, with panoramic views of the Puget Sound. It marked the one-year anniversary of the Constellation Initiative, and it shimmered with purpose, elegance, and the quiet pride of impact. Inside, the room buzzed, not with the hollow flash of vanity, but with gratitude. Former interns, now team leads. Women who had left toxic jobs and started their own ventures. Executives who had restructured their organizations after attending the initiative's retreats. Mentors and ments who'd once been strangers, now lifelong collaborators. And at the center of it all stood Nancy Price. Dressed in midnight blue, hair swept into a soft bun, her eyes lit with focus. She wasn't just attending, she was being honored. Architect of Transformation, the plaque read. But she didn't linger at her table. She made her rounds. Hugged people. Asked about their projects. Remembered names. Faces. Stories. Elijah watched from across the room, heart full, wine untouched. It was one thing to fall in love with brilliance. It was another to watch brilliance choose to light the path for others. He stepped away briefly, returning just as she finished speaking to a group of donors. She turned and smiled when she saw him. "You've been quiet tonight," she said, looping her arm through his. "Just trying not to get in the way of a legend in action." "Elijah." He kissed her temple. "Come with me." She followed him out of the venue, heels clicking against the stone steps until they reached the rooftop garden overlooking the Sound. Above them, the sky was unusually clear, velvety and open, dotted with stars. It was quiet, not the silence of awkwardness, but the hush of something sacred. He took her hand and placed it over his heart. His voice was low. "I've given speeches to rooms of thousands. But right now, I'm struggling to say the one thing that's been growing in me every day since the first night we stood on a rooftop and didn't need words." Her eyes welled instantly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. "But I'll say it anyway." He opened it. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a single diamond cradled by two curved bands, one silver, one gold. "I love you, Nancy Price. Not for what you've done, but for who you are when no one's looking. For the way you fight quietly. For the fire in your gentleness. For the way you walk into rooms now and own them, not because someone let you, but because you built the door yourself." He got down on one knee. "And I want to build the rest of this life with you. The way we built everything else, hand in hand, challenge by challenge, idea by idea. So I'm asking." His voice trembled, but his eyes didn't leave hers. "Will you marry me?" She didn't speak. She couldn't. She just dropped to her knees in front of him, threw her arms around him, and whispered the only word she could find between laughter and tears. "Yes." She pulled back, cupped his face in both hands. "And not just because I love you, but because with you I never have to shrink. You see me. You've always seen me." He slipped the ring onto her finger, hands shaking. It fit perfectly. The stars blinked overhead. The city pulsed below. But here, on this rooftop, time stopped. Later that night, they stood wrapped in each other's arms, forehead to forehead, their future already forming in the quiet between them. Not a fairy tale. Something better. A legacy. And when Nancy looked up at the sky, at the constellations that once kept her company when no one else saw her, she whispered, "I see you now too." And for the first time in her life, she didn't just feel seen. She felt chosen. By the work. By the love. By the life she had built, and the man who had chosen to build it with her. Together. 6 months later, Innovate Solutions didn't look the same, and neither did Nancy. The company had undergone a quiet revolution. Office politics hadn't disappeared, but they were no longer the dominant language. There was more laughter in the hallways, more collaboration between teams. Employee retention had hit an all-time high. Interns no longer fetched coffee. They shadowed directors and joined design huddles. HR actually protected people now. And at the center of it all was Nancy Price, now Chief Strategy Officer. She had earned every inch of that title, and not by being attached to Elijah Cross, but by being herself, smart, relentless, empathetic, and unapologetically honest. The board had voted unanimously. Even the skeptics. Even the ones who once couldn't remember her name. The announcement was made in a packed conference hall. Elijah introduced her, not with a list of accolades, but with one sentence. This company got lucky the day she stopped hiding. The applause was thunderous. But Nancy didn't stand in that room thinking about power. She stood there thinking about meaning, about the quiet girl on the 12th floor who once felt invisible, who once ate lunch in empty conference rooms, who once almost quit. That girl had found her voice. And now others were finding theirs because of her. That evening, the couple returned to their shared apartment, a sunlit space overlooking the bay, walls lined with books, maps, sketches of future projects, and one old telescope pointed toward a future still unfolding. Elijah was making dinner. Barefoot, shirt sleeves rolled up, hair a mess from the wind. Nancy sat at the kitchen island, sipping white wine, watching him in that domestic rhythm that somehow still made her chest tighten. "You ever miss the quiet?" she asked. He turned, raising a brow. "Which quiet?" "The kind that comes from being overlooked." He paused. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember I was surviving. Not living." She nodded slowly. "Do you?" "No," she said. "Not anymore. Because I've made too many ripples now. Going back would be like trying to hide sunlight." He smiled at that. When dinner was done, grilled sea bass, lemon risotto, her favorite, Elijah pulled out a leather-bound notebook from the drawer. Not his usual work journal. This one was worn at the edges, filled with sketches and ideas. "And names." "What's this?" she asked. He slid it across the table. "The future." Inside were notes for a foundation. One they'd been dreaming of. Focused on workplace equity, mentorship programs, community outreach for underserved young professionals, especially women in STEM and strategy. "You ready to make this bigger than just us?" he asked. She traced her fingers over the title written on the first page. The Constellation Initiative. She looked up at him, eyes shining. "Let's light the whole damn sky." Later, after the dishes were done and the wine was gone, they stood barefoot on the balcony, her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her. The stars were out, scattered and distant. Familiar. But Nancy no longer looked to them for direction. Now she looked with them. Because she wasn't chasing light anymore. She was creating it. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.